and welcome to this Township of West Lincoln Public Meeting Procedures and Planning Act requirement. So this is a meeting, a public meeting to address amendments to the official plan. The time is 6:30. It's Wednesday, April 27th, and this is actually for official plan amendment number 62 for the Township of West Lincoln, Smithville Master Community Plan. So welcome staff and council and members of the public. The Planning Act requires in section 17 sub 15 that before adopting an official plan amendment, council must hold at least one public meeting for the purpose of informing the public in respect to the amendment. The purpose of this meeting is to receive comments and to answer questions from the public regarding the amendment to the Township of West Lincoln, West Lincoln's official plan. We stress that at this point, no decision has been made on the proposed amendment, and any comments received will be taken into account by council in their consideration. The Planning Act requires under the Ontario Regulation 543 sub 6 that council advise the public that if any person or public body does not make oral submissions at a public meeting or make written submissions to the Township of West Lincoln before the bylaw is passed, a person or public body is not entitled to appeal the decision of council for the Township of West Lincoln to the Ontario Land Tribunal. I'm going to ask the clerk to please advise the method and date by which notice of the public meeting was given. Madam Clerk.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Proper notice was given by way of advertising in a newspaper with general circulation on April 7th, 2022, as well as posting notice of the public meeting on the township's website.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. And I will ask the Director of Planning and Building, our own Mr. Brian Treble, to explain the purpose and reason for the proposed official plan amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is an official plan amendment that has been initiated to explore how to accommodate growth allocations to the township, both population allocations as well as employment allocations. And we have a team of consultants who have been working extensively with us for over 2 years now to assist in putting a comprehensive plan and recommendation together. And I'm actually, Mr. Mayor, going to turn it over to the team to do an extensive presentation so that we give a fulsome understanding to council, the public, and landowners, et cetera, about the proposal that's before us. So Mr. Weaver will be the first presenter. And I believe we will also hear from Carl Grenice, Aaron Farrell, and Ed Stubing. I think maybe I've got the full of the presentation panel listed there. Mr. Mayor, just before we do that, though, I just want to put on the record the fact that there have been some additional correspondence items that have been received since the planning report of staff that's in our agenda package for tonight. So I just want to mention those for the record, and the correspondence will then be attached to the minutes of this meeting.
Okay.
The first is I'm just doing them in the order that I have them in front of me here, Mr. Mayor, my apologies. The first on my pile is a letter signed by James and Zoe Gunn, Peter and Benita Burma, and Brian Lass with respect to lands on 30 Road. Second is an item of correspondence that has been received late this afternoon from Jennifer Meter on behalf of Phelps Homes and JTG Holdings Incorporated. Another letter is from Elizabeth Aboni at 6392 Town Line Road in Smithville. And the final letter that I have that I believe is an ad report is from Mr. Lyle Killens. Based on the way he signs it, it looks like it might be septic related questions he's posing on behalf of the township. And it ties in, I think, to the full servicing proposals and how Baker Road, et cetera, will be expanded. So those, Mr. Mayor, I just want to put on the record. And as I say, they'll be attached to the minutes of this meeting.
Great, thank you.
So if it's okay, I think we should turn over to Mr. Weaver to make a fulsome presentation.
Thank you. Go ahead, Mr. Weaver. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Mayor Bilsman, and thank you, Brian, for the introduction. Good evening, Mayor and Council and members of the public attending, and thank you for your time to hear from us with an update on this project. As the Mayor has outlined, we are here for a statutory public meeting under the Planning Act for an official plan amendment number 62 to be specific, which is implementing components of the master community plan for Smithville. And we'll provide some of the details of that. So we do have a slideshow, and I'll start sharing my screen now so that folks can follow along. A moment. Did that come up okay, Mr. Mayor?
Yeah, that looks great.
In terms of our agenda, so I will kick things off with a bit of an update on the overall project schedule, and then overview the revised concept plan that has been developed for the proposed land uses in the Smithville urban expansion area. And then I'll turn it over to the rest of the team to talk about, Aaron will review the updates on the subwatershed and stormwater management strategy component. And then Carl will walk us through the water and wastewater components. And finally, Ed will take us through the transportation updates. I will then cover off the details of the draft official plan amendment number 62, talk a little bit about next steps, and then we'll move on to the bulk of the meeting, which is to entertain any questions from the public and council. So just starting off with the project timeline. For reference, there are 4 phases to the project. We are currently in phase 3. Each of these phases has involved some previous public consultation. So the preliminary phase was really an information gathering exercise. And there was an initial PIC, Public Information Center 0, held on January 30th of 2020, which really launched the process. And we had some facilitated questions and discussion about future visions and ideas and concerns for the growth that we're trying to plan for. In phase 1, there was a PIC number 1 held on February 11th, 2021, where we presented some of the background information that was collected, some of the initial concepts that were developed for evaluation, and some of the research that was done by the team to that point. And then in phase 2, we had a impact assessment on those 2 concept options and presented a preliminary preferred option to council and the public in October of 2021. And since then, we've really been working to refine the preliminary preferred concept to create the preferred concept plan, as well as the implementation components involving official plan amendment number 62. And there will be a separate further official plan amendment number 63 presented at a future date, which will implement other components of the master community plan. I will note as well that in phase 3 and as part of the statutory process, a virtual open house was held over the past couple of weeks. It was through the plansmithville.ca website. So all of the information that we're presenting tonight is available on that engagement site as well. And we encourage folks to review the information on the site. A survey was made available as well, and we're reviewing the results of that input. And a copy of tonight's presentation, I expect, will be made available on the engagement site as well. So people can refer back to it if there's anything that they missed as we're presenting it. So moving on to the preferred concept option, there are 3 components to it. There's the overall land uses, which we were referring to here as place types. There's a transportation plan, which I'll present following this, and then there's a natural heritage system. This will probably look familiar to those who've participated in the process to date. Earlier concepts explored different configurations of potential land uses in each part of the study area, explored different ways that those land uses might connect. And since then, we've really just added more detail to it and refined some of the boundaries of the land uses. So effectively, what this preferred concept is endeavoring to do is establish where specific land uses would be directed within the future expansion area of Smithville. just to orient folks to the geography here. So the west side of the proposed urban expansion area, which is delineated by the red line here, is South Grimsby Road 6, and then extended across Regional Road 20 and the CPR rail line to the Hydro Corridor in the north, which forms the north boundary until you get to this point, and it then jogs to the north to Yonge Street, returning back to the east boundary east of Industrial Park Road here, which follows along a section of the existing urban boundary before jogging east and then back to Regional Road 20 in the south. In the south end, we're following property lines for the most part here that coincide to the original study area that was created for the study for the master community plan, and then over to North Creek and following that as the southerly limit of the boundary. So you can see, just to orient you to within that urban expansion area, there are 3 new residential neighborhoods that are proposed, one on each of the north, west, and south sides of Smithville. And then in the north and east is proposed a rounding out of the existing Northeast Industrial Park. In each of these new residential neighborhoods, we're proposing a mix of land uses to ensure that there's convenient and walkable access to local commercial, to community facilities, to parks, and that there are a range and mix of housing types provided. The yellow shading represents areas which would be predominantly the low density form of housing, so single detached homes, semi-detached homes, a few townhomes in those designations. The orange areas represent areas along key corridors where there may be a greater mix of housing, such as more townhouses and similar multi-unit types of dwellings. And then finally, in each of the neighborhoods, there is a community hub or node identified where there would be more of a concentration of a mixed use layout. And that includes things like commercial and residential mixed use buildings, as well as live work and medium density residential uses. In the purple shaded areas are existing and proposed community facilities. So we're anticipating some new schools would be required, that there may be indoor things like community centers, recreation facilities, and parks and open space as well in the open space designations that are shown. And in addition, there would be the opportunity to potentially look at part of the existing leisureplex in the southwest corner for an indoor facility as well. Some of the land use areas identified in the expansion are more community-wide in nature, in that they would serve the entire community and not specifically the individual residential neighborhoods. Certainly the leisureplex and any recreation or community facilities that go with that is one example. But the other examples are 2 kind of community commercial areas, one along Regional Road 20 in the northwest and one along Regional Road 20 in the southeast. So those would be kind of 2 peripheral anchor commercial areas that would help to support the types of commercial uses that may not be able to locate in the downtown area, such as larger floor plates and that kind of thing, retail, personal service, and those kinds of uses. The green represents the natural heritage system, which has really been used to frame the entire plan and link it together. There are open space areas identified as well for parks and outdoor recreation. There are some existing corridors identified as well, such as an existing natural gas pipeline corridor in the south, the hydro corridors in the north. So that's an overview of the preferred land use concept. It's important to note, I think at this point, that this land use concept plan is not what would be implemented through the current official plan amendment number 62. Official plan amendment number 62 would simply implement the red urban boundary for Smithville, but a separate official plan amendment will be proposed to add the specific land uses shown on this concept plan. For the transportation component, obviously we need to ensure that each of those land use areas is linked together, and that we're also addressing both the through traffic and traffic within the community through appropriate roads, and providing for an active transportation system for walkers and cyclists. So there is a hierarchy of different types of roads identified in the transportation network. At the top level of the hierarchy are the main roads that would facilitate through traffic, as well as some commercial traffic and trucking. And one of the issues that's been identified through this process is concerns about the amount of through truck traffic coming through the heart of Smithville. So there have been different options explored in terms of potential alternative truck routes and bypass options. What we've shown here conceptually is the opportunity for a north bypass route along the south side of the hydro corridor, connecting to Regional Road 20 on the west and connecting back to Regional Road 20 in the southeast. That would have a dual function of providing an option for trucks to move through the community by going around the downtown and not through it. And that would also serve the Northeast Industrial Park area for local industry. Other components of the road hierarchy, obviously there are some existing regional roads, which are shown here. Those are major, primary routes through and within the community. In the south, Town Line Road is envisaged to be upgraded with turning lanes to provide capacity for the additional traffic anticipated with growth. And then the neighborhoods are expected to be connected from Regional Road 20 down South Grimsby Road 6 with a new internal collector road that would loop all the way down through the south and over to Shirley Road, and then also in the north as an extension of Spring Creek Road. Back to this proposed future arterial road. All of these roads are conceptual, and the specific alignments and routes have not been chosen at this point. We will note that in some cases, we're proposing a small realignment of certain roads to optimize the location of intersections and the flow of traffic. Port Davidson Road is one example where we've shown the possibility of realigning Port Davidson Road to a new intersection with Canberra Street, because right now those two roads are offset. However, that is not necessarily something that would definitively be implemented and is subject to further review. And obviously that doesn't entail removal of land from that existing property at this point in time. That's something that's a future consideration if that were part of a development plan for the involved properties. The local roads are shown in the lighter blue, and just to note that those are also conceptual, and ultimately the specific location and configuration of the roads would be determined through area plans for each of these areas, as well as plans of subdivision and other planning applications. You'll see there's a number of other components to the system as well. I mentioned the trails, there's the existing rail corridor. I wanted to mention that because it is a significant constraint in terms of the options for additional north-south connections. We've consulted with CPR through this process, and they have advised us that any future rail crossings would need to be grade separated. In other words, any road crossing would have to be either under the railway or over it. And so we've represented that on the concept to show that if that road is built in the future, it would have to cross over or under the rail crossing. And then the third component to the preferred concept plan is the natural heritage system. Again, this has been used to frame the entire plan. I think we heard a lot early in the process about the need to respect the environment, to ensure that sensitive features are protected, and that there's opportunity for enhancement of the natural environment by maintaining open space, connections, and preserving habitat and other features, as well as mitigating potential concerns with respect to flooding and areas that may be subject to other hazards such as erosion, as well as the karst features that are present in the area. And Aaron will speak further to that as part of the sub-watershed study presentation. So at this point in the presentation, we'll turn it over to Aaron, who's going to take us through the subwatershed and stormwater management components of the project. And then from there, you'll hear from Carl and Ed on the water, wastewater, and transportation components. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Go ahead, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Steve. The subwatershed study component of the overall process really is part that looks at the natural environment in the area, evaluates the impacts from the future development, and more importantly, comes up with the strategy and the management plan to mitigate these impacts and protect the environment as well as the safety of the people. There are various specialists and technical experts that are involved in the subwatershed study, and I'll be providing a summary shortly of the findings from each of their respective disciplines. But with respect to the outcome of the study, ultimately the subwatershed study provides the natural heritage system for the future urban area, provides guidance and direction with respect to managing
I believe you've frozen. We'll wait a couple seconds and hopefully Aaron can come back.
Yeah, I've lost his video and his audio.
Yeah, okay. Okay, maybe we'll come back to Aaron. Steve, you said you had 3 or 4 presenters, so maybe we'll go to the next one if you could.
Sure. Carl, if you're ready, I'll skip ahead to the water and wastewater servicing component.
Great.
There we go.
All right. Thank you. Thank you, Steve. Mr. Mayor. The next few slides summarize the preferred water and wastewater servicing strategy, including phasing. So this slide presents the water servicing strategy. Future municipal water demands will be met by constructing a new 400 millimeter diameter water transmission main ring system as shown in red. This also includes local water mains, which are shown in blue. The approach to routing the transmission main is to maximize the use of existing road corridors and future road network as guided by the master community plan, and also be coordinated with future improvements to existing roads, such as the future improvements to Town Line Road that Steve mentioned. This strategy continues to follow the direction from Niagara Region's 2016 Water and Wastewater Master Servicing Plan that also identified a similar ring type transmission main system. And this strategy will be subsequently captured in the region's current Water and Wastewater Master Servicing Plan update. If we could just go to the next slide, Steve, please. So continuing with water servicing, future water demands from the new urban area will be met by increasing pumping capacity at the London Road Reservoir without the need for new additional storage facilities such as an elevated tank. So we're putting in bigger pumps at that facility that can get more water out to the urban area. The recommended infrastructure projects will be implemented in 4 phases, which you see in the 4 different colors on the map. All the projects at this time are anticipated to be Schedule A+ under the Municipal Class EA and through the Integrated Planning Act and Municipal Class EA process. This is subject to approvals by regional and township council and no appeals of OPA 63, which Steve touched upon earlier. So we'll just spend a little bit of time here now just going through the phasing so you can understand it. So we'll start with the dark blue line. So phase 1 will extend from the London Road Reservoir to the right and then head north, where it will follow Spring Creek Road and the future Spring Creek Road extension as per the Northwest Quadrant Secondary Plan. The phase 1 transmission main will be then routed down South Grimsby Road 5, where it will connect and leave a chamber at the intersection of South Grimsby Road 5 and West Street. If we're looking now over at the purple line to the right, we see phase 2 extending southerly from the London Road pumping station, following generally Industrial Park Road and an existing easement south of Regional Road 20 that will then connect to Town Line Road. This phase 2 area will also be coordinated with the East Smithville Secondary Plan Development Area. So again, phase 4 now, lastly, is the red line. So it will extend from Town Line Road northerly, following the new road network through the master community plan. And then it will head east and northerly through an existing utility easement where it will cross 20 Mile Creek and connect to the chamber that I described at West Street and South Grimsby Road 5. This is also the location where we are proposing a pedestrian bridge too. So it's sort of a little bit of a utility corridor and an active transportation corridor. As shown in the dashed blue lines, all phases include local distribution water main that would service the future master community plan development areas, block plans, and developments as such. The next slide will now go to the wastewater servicing strategy. The overall wastewater servicing strategy is based on sending future sanitary sewer flows to an upgraded existing Smithville wastewater pumping station located on Regional Road 20, as identified in the region's 2016 Water and Wastewater Master Plan. This will also require new sanitary sewers that will send the flows to the upgraded station that will utilize existing and future roads that follow the Master Community Plan road network. I think we brought this up before, but a really important point to this strategy is that it avoids sending future development sanitary flows through the existing sanitary sewer network, parts of which are already at near capacity. So what this means, any new flows won't be entering the existing system, and therefore will not contribute to increasing basement flooding. In terms of pumping facilities, we're proposing a new wastewater pumping station at Streamside Drive near the existing station. And then we also have 2 new pumping stations in the south, which are shown by the dark blue triangles. The siting of the new wastewater pumping stations was guided by topography. So what this means is we would like to be at the lowest elevation possible, which will facilitate sending flows to the station by gravity. This also would minimize the depth of the station, which would increases the cost the deeper you go. Also, the siting was guided by the desire that the sewage pumping station facility be integrated with planned open space and stormwater management facility land use blocks that Steve has shown on the preferred master community plan concept. Similar to the water servicing infrastructure projects, sanitary sewer will be implemented in 4 phases. And again, the projects are anticipated to be Schedule A+ if they're approved following the integrated process and approved by Regional Council and Township Council, and there are no appeals to OPA 63. Last point here is this strategy also builds upon the region's current water and wastewater master servicing plan and will be used to inform the current master servicing plan update. So that's it, the summary for water and wastewater. I will now like to pass it on to Ed, who will walk us through the transportation assessment component. And then hopefully Aaron. Thank you very much.
Okay, that's thanks, Carl. And so we'll go to Ed, and then Aaron. I did see you come back on, so we'll come back around and pick you up after Ed speaks. Go ahead, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and councillors. So here today to talk about the transportation component. So to start with the process that we've gone through for this, there's two main components to the transportation assessment. The first is a traffic analysis, which includes the forecasting exercise, which is using the traffic model. And then the second is a review of multimodal needs. That's where we look at other modes of transportation, such as active transportation, pedestrians, and transit. So we've developed the traffic model for the traffic analysis, which uses a modeling exercise to develop a model to show existing conditions based on the best available data we have. That uses traffic counts, input from the regional model, and other spot counts as needed. This model is then calibrated and balanced, and we check it to see that it's the best representation we can provide of the existing model. Once we have that model for the base year, we can then move into phase one, which is the future testing. This is where we're going to do a future scenario with and without development, and we're also going to test the implementation of any major infrastructure. Phase two is that once we have the preferred concept refined and also any major infrastructure has been identified and tested, we will then do further sensitivity analysis and refinement of the concept. Next slide, please. So in the phase one, what we have done here and what this is showing is the impacts on the traffic network as a result of the development and without the development in a 2051 horizon. What these diagrams are showing is the impacts on delay to movement in the network. And without spending too long on this, I think what it shows is that the amount of delay experienced on the network as a result of the development is significant compared to that without. This gives us really important information in terms of assessing what sort of mitigation measures are needed to try and improve the traffic network and to minimize the impact of this new development and growth. What you can see is that there's quite a bit of an increase in the delays and traffic in the center of town. As you can see on the image on the right, there was already going to be some by 2051, but that is intensified with the result of the new development. We also see a significant amount of delay on Town Line Road as a result of the proposed development in the southeast. And this is similarly impacts South Country Road 6 as it heads north towards Regional Road 20. We do see a few other spots of some delays. Some of those are similar to what would be seen without the development, because we expect over time as traffic grows, there will be a continued trend of vehicles wanting to travel to the north to access the QEW, and that's sort of reflected along Yonge Street by the delays at those intersections. But we're also seeing a growth in the demand for travel to the west along Regional Road 20, which is also reflected in the image on the left. Next slide, please. So in phase one, as mentioned, what we're looking for is not only to establish those two with and without development traffic models, but also looking at regional infrastructure. The way we do that is we look at what the Niagara region has in their transportation master plan for the area and any other planned transportation infrastructure or mitigation measures. In the case of Smithville, there is only one major piece of transportation infrastructure that's identified in the regional TMP, and that is the Smithfield Bypass. What you'll see on the right is the modeling work that we have done to test a number of different bypass options. As you may be aware, The original alignment of a Smithfield bypass was proposed to be south of the Smithville area. So we wanted to test this. We then also recognized that the regional TMP has a northern alignment, and even more recent than that, there's been growing interest in the new escarpment crossing, and there's a need to recognize that any Smithville bypass should be strategically linked to a new escarpment crossing. For this reason, we developed 3 different options, tested them in the model. It's important to note the testing of these alignments doesn't necessarily mean that there is a preferred alignment. It's more at a conceptual level of a south versus north within the urban boundary versus north outside of the urban boundary approach to the provision of a bypass, and what impact that has on traffic flow in the Smithville area. So what we did in this analysis is we ran this through the model, and what we saw was that a northern alignment of the bypass has a greater effect overall on traffic in the town. It also meets that strategic need of providing improved linkages to the north, which would provide access to the QEW through a future escarpment crossing. Given this, we have progressed into phase 2 with a northern aligned bypass that is proposed to follow an alignment that runs just south of the existing hydro corridor. Next slide, please. So now that we have that regional infrastructure in place, we can start doing some of the sensitivity testing. This is where we start looking at more localized improvements, whether to signalize certain intersections, whether there are new collector roads that are required, and a few other little tests that we would like to run. One of those involves the CP rail line and looking at the need for grade separation of other existing rights-of-way that cross the railway line. So what you'll see in the image on the right is that we've identified a number of intersections where we wanted to test signalization. At the moment, we are proposing that some of these would be signalized and that some of these would not be signalized. I'm not going to go into details of the which one, but that is part of the process that we will detail in our report and in a subsequent transportation master plan for the town. We also looked at the widening of some of these corridors. I think as Steve previously mentioned, one of our findings is that Town Line Road suffers quite a bit of congestion in the future with development scenario, and that's why we're proposing a widening of this to a 3-lane corridor with a turning lane. We're also looking at, where possible, to align intersections along Town Line Road to minimize the number of offset intersections and turning vehicles coming on and off of Town Line Road. In terms of the North Bypass, as it's currently constructed, we are proposing that the section of road that would run adjacent to the hydro corridor would actually be a 4-lane alignment. This would therefore allow it to serve the dual purpose of a local collector road, facilitating east-west movement within town, as well as performing that feature of being a bypass of the town as well. As I mentioned, one of the other things that we wanted to test was grade separation of some of the existing north-south linkages. We did this exercise and found that really there was very little benefit in providing additional grade separated crossings of the CP rail line beyond the 2 proposed, one at the east and one at the west side of the town, and that there should be sufficient capacity to allow vehicles that do have to divert to use these options rather than experiencing significant delays on the existing north-south corridors. Next slide, please. As I mentioned, the other part of the transportation analysis looks at multimodal. We've developed a series of street state standards that we propose are implemented on many new roads. Steve previously alluded to the fact that there is a hierarchy of these. These range from a 4-lane arterial structure, shown in the bottom right image, through collector roads and down to local roads where parking might be a feature of the road. And all of these different streetscape arrangements are available on the Plan Smithfield site. The other thing that's been mentioned is the need for an active transportation network. What we've done is we've looked at a number of different sites, both within the existing and proposed Smithville urban boundary, that we believe are trip generators or trip destinations that people will want to travel to. These will be therefore prioritized in terms of being connected by active transportation provision. 2 other things that have come up through the consultation process and that we have been actively looking at are parking provision, particularly in the downtown area. and looking at ways of improving that, and also public transit. The current trial of the on-demand public transit seems to be going well, and we're looking at how this could be expanded upon. Next slide, please. So just in summary, the findings show that the urban boundary expansion development will have a significant impact on the level of delay and the volume of traffic across the network. There is a need to provide a number of new additional links, as well as a couple of mitigation strategies, such as signalization and road widening on some existing corridors. We also recommend that an active transportation network and streetscape designs and standards can be introduced to try and encourage some trips, particularly those shorter ones, to be made by alternative modes, which would help to further reduce traffic impacts. And the final thing is to note that the recommendations of the modeling exercise, the streetscape designs, the active transportation network, will all be detailed in a transportation master plan for Smithville, which is one of the next steps in this process. Thank you. I'll turn it back to Aaron, hopefully.
Okay, Aaron, are you there?
Yes, I am, Mr. Mayor. My apologies for losing the connection there.
No problem at all. It's a common occurrence these days. So take it away. Go ahead.
All right. Thank you very much. So the Sub-Watershed Study, just to recap very briefly, is providing the input for the protection of the natural environment within the study area. There are several disciplines that are involved in completing the study that I'll be speaking about shortly. And the key direction that we are providing through this work is defining the natural heritage system direct input for the planning, providing the guidance and direction for managing, protecting the watercourses in the area, as well as the criteria and the plan for stormwater management. Next slide, please. With respect to the status of our work, our study team has completed a review of background information and undertaken quite a bit of field investigation to get the understanding of the natural features and systems on the landscape right now, as well as their interactions and interdependencies. The impact assessment work has been done in two phases. The first phase involves more of a diagnostic exercise, analyzing when the land use changes, but if there's no mitigation, what happens? And that tells us the impacts that need to be mitigated and is the direct input for the next phase of the impact assessment.
Well, I believe we've lost Aaron again now on vocals. Mr. Weaver, can you complete Aaron's presentation, or is that?
Yeah, I think I can quickly summarize.
Actually, sorry, Steve, I changed my Wi-Fi.
Okay, there you go, sir. You're back on.
Yes, we happen to have two Wi-Fi. Okay. Next slide, please. So starting off with the groundwater impact assessment. In terms of the impacts that require mitigation, it's recognized that the increase in impervious coverage, which results from urban development, reduces the amount of water that infiltrates into the groundwater system and potentially decreases the groundwater levels and the associated discharge to the environmental systems. There's also the potential in our study area for the movement of contaminants, particularly in areas where the groundwater is shallower. And there's also recognized to be potential impacts from infrastructure, both the installation of the infrastructure through the dewatering exercises, as well as the potential interception of the groundwater by the trenches that accommodate the infrastructure. Next slide, please. So in terms of the mitigation strategies for the groundwater, a key component is incorporating low impact development practices as part of the stormwater management plan. And this would promote the infiltration as well as provide some of the water quality protection for the groundwater system, Also incorporating anti-seepage collars or clay plugs in the infrastructure trenches to mitigate the groundwater interception that might occur. It's also important to recognize that there are some guidelines and some approvals that may be required for dewatering activities, and this would be through the MECP at the provincial level. Next slide, please. So the area has karst features, and these are openings in the limestone bedrock. And these form as a result of storm runoff and snow melt, and really are in the form of sinkholes. The photo in the bottom right shows what these features look like. In terms of the impacts of urbanization, it would result in an increase of the surface runoff toward the karst features. And this represents not only a geotechnical hazard, but also a potential flood hazard, because there's only so much water that these features can actually convey into the subsurface. Next slide, please. So the management recommendations are specific to each of the karst features on the landscape, and there is actually a total of 11 that have been identified. There are 3 features which have been designated as karst hazardous sites, and these would be protected in situ, and there would be a 50-meter buffer around the feature. Within that 50-meter buffer, development would not be permitted to occur. The remaining features can all be managed without requiring that 50-meter buffer, and the management recommendations are specific to each feature in the form of increasing the size of an adjacent culvert to allow for better conveyance of water, as well as some of the features can be excavated and grouted, essentially being eliminated from the landscape. And in other cases, there can be a bypassing of the excess runoff around the feature. In all cases, though, it's important that there be no increase in the runoff toward the karst feature. So again, this reinforces the need for low impact development within the stormwater management plan. Next slide, please. Looking at the surface water, future development in the absence of any management or mitigation strategies would increase both the volume and the rate of runoff from the future areas. And this increase in volume and runoff rate would translate into an increased erosion potential along the water courses, as well as increased flood risk, both locally and online the main water courses. It's also important to remember that there's impacts to surface water quality as well in the form of increased concentrations of solids, oils, metals, and certain nitrogenous and phosphorus species. Next slide, please. So to mitigate these impacts, we've developed a stormwater management plan to address stormwater quality treatment to an enhanced standard per the provincial guidance, mitigate thermal impacts, the warming of runoff that occurs from urbanization, as well as addressing the impacts to erosion and flooding and water budget to the karst features. Next slide, please. So the stormwater management plan actually builds on the criteria that I've outlined here. With respect to impacts to water quality and to erosion, all the future development is required to incorporate stormwater quality treatment and erosion control measures. To mitigate the flood impacts, what we've found from our work is that those portions of the future development that are discharging to tributaries that extend through private properties will need to have flood control measures implemented. But for those areas which are actually discharging directly to the 20-mile creek or the North Creek, flood control measures would actually not be required for those. And this is because of the timing influence of some of these flood control measures online in those major water courses. The last component is for low impact development, best management practices to be implemented for all of the future development. And I'll be speaking a little bit further to this a little bit later on. Next slide, please. Looking at the area watercourses, the drainage features on the landscape are in the form of headwater drainage features, essentially agricultural swales, with some well-defined regulated watercourses, most notably the 20 Mile Creek main branch, as well as the North Creek at the south limit of the study area. Next slide, please. So the impacts of urbanization are generally in the form of increased erosion potential along the watercourses, as I'd mentioned before on the surface water discussion. It's important to remember with the increased erosion potential, this is a natural hazard that would be exacerbated and would pose a risk to property as well as to infrastructure. New watercourse crossings are going to be implemented primarily to support the transportation network, and the crossings, if not properly designed and sized, would increase the scour and the erosion potential locally at the opening. We also have to provide properly sized watercourse corridors. If the corridors are too small, it impacts the natural stream processes and the natural cover and the impacts to aquatic habitat accordingly. Next slide, please. So the management recommendations for the area watercourses, recommendations for the headwater drainage features have been established based upon the characterization of features and the guidance that's been provided in the CVC and TRCA guidelines. With respect to the regulated watercourses, there are many of them which are in a degraded form. And so there's the opportunity through the work not only to provide the flood and the erosion protection, but also to enhance and improve the quality of the habitat within the watercourse systems. With respect to the road crossings, we're providing guidance and some direction and criteria for the appropriate sizing of the hydraulic structures, the bridges and the culverts that would be spanning the watercourses, as well as the spacing in between the structures and the length of structures to be implemented. Next slide, please. The last discipline is related to the terrestrial and aquatic ecology, and it's important to keep in mind we have the 20 Mile Creek and the North Creek, which support a very diverse and robust aquatic habitat and fish community. We also have some of the headwater drainage features, those swales that I'd mentioned, that support the aquatic habitat by providing some nutrients to those systems. From the terrestrial side, we have several significant wetlands, woodlands, and wildlife habitat, as well as species at risk that have been identified on the landscape that need to be protected post-development. Next slide, please. The impacts to the ecology are in the form of direct, indirect, and the induced impacts. The direct impacts are those which affect the physical form of the feature itself. The indirect impacts are more related to how changes to the surface water and the groundwater system would affect the ecology, both aquatic and terrestrial. And lastly, the induced impacts are more associated with the proximity of human activity in the form of informal trailblazing by the residents and the impacts from pets and domestic wildlife. Next slide, please. So the management recommendations related to the direct impacts are in the form of the tree protection plans, proper timing of vegetation removal to avoid the active season for wildlife, conducting appropriate surveys if vegetation removal is to occur within the seasons to ensure that proper protective measures are being implemented, compensation for habitat, incorporating wildlife linkages, and most notably compliance with permits and other requirements from the Endangered Species Act. Next slide, please. For the indirect impacts, the key management strategy is actually implementing a robust and sustainable natural heritage system, which I'll be describing in a few moments. Component of the natural heritage system includes buffers around certain core features that have to be of appropriate width to provide the appropriate protection, and also compensation for the tree removal and construction mitigation plans. Lastly, the indirect impacts are also being managed and mitigated through the stormwater management plan, implementing low impact development, and providing a water balance to the wetlands in the area. The induced impacts are mitigated primarily through education for the residents in the area. So this is form of brochures and signage along trails. Also managing invasive species to prevent them from taking over in certain locations, and constructing new habitat features. So these would be like birdhouses, bat boxes, areas that would be, or habitat features that would be within the urban area. There's also best management practices that should be followed during construction, wildlife crossings at roadways, and implementing trails at appropriate locations. And next slide. So all of the information that I've just described before has been used to come up with the natural heritage system. The natural heritage system builds upon the existing features within the area and provides linkages and connections to integrate them and to really provide a cohesive and a robust natural system. Next slide, please. So this graphic is showing the natural heritage system that was developed through the Subwatershed Study. And as Steve has mentioned previously, this was provided as input to the overall land use planning process. Next slide, please. The last point just to make with respect to the Subwatershed Study relates to climate change. It's recognized by all levels of government that climate change has the potential to affect really every aspect of our lives, including human health, well-being, as well as the environmental impacts. It's also recognized to present a risk to our infrastructure. Aging infrastructure, where we've got existing urban areas, but also a potential risk to new infrastructure if not properly sized. In this respect, the province of Ontario, as well as Niagara Region, have policies that require municipalities to consider the potential impacts of climate change as part of natural environment planning in order to better protect the natural environment and to reduce the economic costs associated with climate change. Next slide. So at this point in the Subwatershed Study, we advanced certain measures that will help to mitigate the impacts of climate change. This is in the form of green infrastructure or the low impact development that I mentioned before as part of the stormwater management plan, as well as providing green spaces within the future urban area to reduce heat effects and provide further opportunities for incorporating the green infrastructure into the development fabric. The last component is the natural heritage system itself, which provides the linkages and the enhancement areas. Natural heritage system, because it includes the vegetation, actively reduces harmful greenhouse gas emissions and provides further mitigation of heat effect from urban development and maintains the water budget. Next slide, please. So the next steps in the Subwatershed Study are really building upon all of the information that we had provided before and layering in more detail into the land use plan, specifically coming up with requirements for future studies for the implementation of the study recommendations, as well as requirements for monitoring during construction and post-construction, really to make sure that everything is performing and operating as it's intended. And finally, recommendations for the stormwater management plan related to specific locations of stormwater infrastructure and supportable types by the township. So that actually segues into the next part, which is where my work coordinates a bit more with Carl's work on the Class EA and the servicing study. So the stormwater management plan that's being developed from a servicing standpoint builds upon the criteria that I had mentioned previously and integrates it with the land use fabric and the infrastructure planning for the area, and identifies preferred locations for stormwater management facilities and systems. There are, as you'll see in a moment, a variety of techniques and options available to practitioners for addressing the stormwater management criteria. And the intent of the next phase of the study is to take that long list and reduce it to a short list of preferred practices. And this short list of practices is being developed in consultation with the township, as well as with the TAC for the subwatershed study. And if you go to the next slide. So this table really provides an overview of the long list of practices. They're listed on the left-hand side. And as you see in the columns to the right of that, those are the various functional objectives of stormwater management related to flood control, erosion control, stormwater quality management, and managing water balance. The key thing to note from this graphic is that there is no one stormwater management practice which does everything that needs to be done. So therefore, the stormwater management plan is really going to consist of a combination of practices. The selection of the appropriate practice will be based not only on the function, but also the land use in which it's to be implemented. And that concludes my portion of the presentation. My thanks to all of you for your patience and my apologies for the inconvenience.
And thank you, Aaron. And so I guess we come back full circle to Steve Weaver. So go ahead, sir. Rob, take us home.
Will do.
Hopefully everybody's still invigorated and paying attention.
There's a lot of information that's gone into this for sure, and we are inviting feedback on all of it, but the next part focuses in on the key part that we were looking for comments on, which is the draft official plan amendment. And that's draft OPA 62. So again, this is an amendment proposed to the township's official plan. We've summarized previously that the region, as part of its responsibilities under the provincial growth plan for the Greater Golden Horseshoe, has allocated population and employment forecasts to each local municipality, including the township, to the year 2051. To achieve those growth targets, the purpose of the official plan amendment is to add land to the Smithville urban area boundary. But this, again, official plan amendment number 62 does not actually designate the land for specific land uses such as residential, employment, commercial, etc. It would identify all of the land added to the urban boundary as a future greenfield area, which is basically a placeholder to allow a separate amendment to bring forward the land use designations, OPA 63, at a later date. In the meantime, this OPA number 62 will establish policies to reserve that area for future urban land use, as well as the related transportation, infrastructure, and natural heritage systems. One component of this as well that we can't forget about is there are some rural settlement area boundary changes identified in the region's official plan as well that OPA 62 would implement at the local level. So we have put an asterisk beside some of the key components of this official plan amendment because those are a direct implementation of the Niagara Region official plan. And it's important to highlight those because under the Planning Act of Ontario, where the municipality at the local level is just implementing what the region has required, there are no appeals related to that. So these are the growth forecasts that this official plan amendment number 62 would implement. We do have the 2021 census information now from last year, and that puts the township's population at that time at about 15,454 people. And you can see the magnitude of growth that's anticipated over the 30-year timeline. So about 23,000 people and 10,000 jobs would be the total jobs, adding about 6,000 jobs over the next 30 years. The region's official plan also sets an intensification target for West Lincoln, which identifies how much of this growth is expected to be achieved through redevelopment and infilling and other forms of intensification within the current built-up area of Smithville, and a greenfield density target, which applies to the urban expansion area as well as other remaining greenfield land in Smithville. Again, these are about using land efficiently and having that balance between outward growth as well as redevelopment and intensification in the existing urban area. We have identified a recommended housing mix target for the expansion area of 60% low density, 35% medium density, and 5% high density. So that would be implemented through this official plan amendment. Just to be clear again on the geography of the land to be added, this is a map from OPA 62 and identifies the extent of the urban boundary, which is consistent with that red line that was shown earlier on the concept plan. Again, the schedules to the official plan would be updated by OPA 62 to reserve all of that land surrounding Smithville for future urban growth. And the components of that are identified here. But again, to be clear, the land would be designated for specific land uses through a separate official plan amendment, OPA 63, to be brought forward at a later date. The intent is also to identify the area as a secondary plan area. So all of the land surrounding the existing community that's intended for future urban growth would be guided by the master community plan, which we're calling a secondary plan, as it establishes the details of the land uses, the public park designation in the meantime on the existing Leisureplex property would remain in place. The existing natural heritage system, which you can see underlying the red angled lines, would also remain in place in the meantime, and the secondary plan details would be brought forward through a separate OPA at a later date. Ed spoke briefly about the previously planned south bypass route around Smithville. That dates back to when Regional Road 20 was Highway 20, a provincial highway, and the province had reserved a corridor for a potential bypass around the south side of Smithville. As we know, the region is updating its official plan and has conducted a transportation master plan identifying the possibility of a north bypass route. So the intent of OPA 62 is to remove that south route previously delineated and add policies referring to the north route, which is conceptually identified. I mentioned too that in addition to the Smithville urban boundary changes, there are some hamlet areas or rural settlement areas identified for some minor expansion through the regional official plan. So these are shown here. The hamlets are Abingdon, Caisterville, Bismarck, Fulton, and Wellandport. And the intent there is to have some limited growth directed to these rural settlement areas by rounding out their boundaries. And in the case of Fulton, really focused on a rural employment area along the north side of Regional Road 20. Important to note that we heard very early in the process about the importance of protecting agriculture and concerns about the impact of expanding the Smithville boundary on farming in the surrounding area. And an important component of the master community plan is an agricultural impact assessment that has been prepared by DBH Soil Services, a specialized consultant in agricultural impact review. As part of that, as council I'm sure is well aware, MDS requirements apply where a change in land use is proposed in the area outside of the urban area. And that includes where changes to urban boundary limits are proposed. So the agricultural impact assessment identified a whole host of existing livestock facilities in the surrounding area around Smithville. And those have been, the MDS arcs for those barns have been calculated or estimated where data was not available to indicate where settlement area expansions should avoid the potential for conflicts from odor from those livestock facilities. So the vast majority, in fact, 45 out of the 62 livestock facilities identified, we're maintaining separation from those, and the urban boundary doesn't impact on those facilities. For a smaller number, there are a few already located very close, right on the edge of the existing Smithville boundary. Those would be brought into the urban boundary, but that doesn't mean they can't continue. So those existing livestock facilities shown in blue would be permitted to continue. They would be then located in the urban boundary if OPA 62 is approved. And if there is any development proposed in the future in proximity to those livestock facilities, the development application would have to include an assessment of how to mitigate any potential land use conflicts between the development and the existing livestock facility. The intent is that those facilities, which many of which are fairly marginal in nature, would transition to urban land uses over time. So the land would be incorporated in the future development plans. And then finally, there are a small number of livestock facilities on the edge of the proposed urban boundary where their MDS arc slightly overlaps the boundary. And in all cases except one, the overlap is with the natural heritage system. So there's no concern that there would be land uses within the arc that would be sensitive to the odor because there's a natural heritage system that would be located there. However, there is one barn, number 123. Actually, there's two barns, 123 and 135, part of the same farm operation that overlap a portion of the residential area. So we've taken a closer look at that one, and the impact is shown here. One of the things that MDS allows you to do is assess whether there are already land uses in the area that would be sensitive to that existing livestock operation. And in fact, there are 4 existing dwellings closer to those barns than the proposed residential uses. So what this would mean is that the urban boundary may need to be refined somewhat along this blue line to avoid a conflict with that existing livestock operation, or alternatively, the land within this arc would have to be designated for natural heritage purposes to prevent any sensitive land uses from potentially being impacted by those barns. So we've done our best to avoid the potential for any conflicts from an MDS perspective and to protect existing livestock facilities with the shape of the urban boundary. And one of the main ways of doing that, as you've heard previously, is by excluding the northwest part of the study area from the proposed urban boundary, where there is a bit of a concentration of larger livestock facilities. These next couple of slides just summarize some of the mitigation measures that I've already highlighted with respect to the other overlapping barns. Again, the area that they overlap would be restricted to natural heritage and restoration and open space uses, so no land use conflict concerns. So that brings us to the end of the presentation. We appreciate everybody's patience and attention as we walk through a lot of information there. I will just briefly outline the next steps. So tonight we're going to receive any comments and questions from public and council, in addition to what feedback we heard from the recent open house, as well as then finalize official plan amendment number 62 based on the feedback received and present that for township consideration. And then ultimately that OPA number 62 is subject to the approval of the region of Niagara. As I mentioned, a separate official plan amendment will then be brought forward to implement the specific land uses and other aspects of the master community plan. And that will be subject to a further circulation and public meeting. And then subject to the adoption of those amendments by the township and approval by the region, and no appeals of the master community plan, the sub-watershed study and the municipal servicing master plans would be finalized to guide implementation of the master community plan. So again, thank you for your time and your attention, and we would be happy to take any questions.
Great. Thanks so much, Mr. Weaver. And so at this time, let me see here. I'm just going to change my view a little bit. There we go. Okay. So I'm going to ask, are there any oral or written submissions from anyone present on the Zoom meeting regarding the proposed official plan amendment? I would like to stress that this may be the only public meeting held with respect to this application. Therefore, if any members of the public that are in attendance at the Zoom meeting would like to make a comment and or provide written comments, they should do so now by using one of the two options. Using the computer or smartphone, select raise your hand control that is found in the Zoom options list displayed on your screen, or using a landline or telephone, dial *9. This will notify staff that you have raised your hand. Once you have been acknowledged to speak, please unmute your microphone. It is important to provide your comments now if you have not done so in writing or verbally, as LPAT may not consider comments made during any other council and or committee meetings. Also, anyone wishing to speak are required to unmute their microphone to talk, and once they are finished, they should mute their microphone. Prior to speaking, please provide your name and address for the record. Do any members of council, or so let's just start with that. I do see Raymond Ziemba has raised his hand. Sir, go ahead.
Thank you, and good evening, Mayor and Council members. I'm Raymond Ziemba from SGL Planning and Design, Inc., representing the Smithville Landowners Group, which own land within Smithville, within the Smithville community of West Lincoln. We would like to thank township staff and the consultant team for all their hard work on this project and developing a vision for a complete community in Smithville. We support the proposed settlement area expansion contained within the official plan amendment number 62 and the process. However, we do have significant concerns about the natural heritage system in certain areas, the road cross sections, the infrastructure phasing, and may have concerns with the land uses, but we've not seen OPA 63. We anticipate this will be addressed through OPA 63 and look forward to working together on the subsequent secondary plan. I do want to stress we do support the proposed settlement area expansion contained in OPA 62. Thank you for your time.
Great. Thank you, sir. And then moving forward, I have Mr. Paul Lowe's indicating he'd wish to make comments. Paul Lowe's, go ahead, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and members of council. I'm also with SGL Planning, working with Ray Ziemba. I just want, and of course, working for the Smithville Landowners Group. I just wanted to add one more thing. Ray covered off the landowners' support for OPA 62 and the concern. I just want to address that last matter that was raised by Mr. Weaver, and that's the MDS ARCs. We've just become aware of that ourselves as a landowners group. Staff raised that with us last week. We've seen this in other locations, and we believe it can be addressed appropriately through phasing policies, which will reserve the land for future development. Mr. Weaver suggested a natural heritage policy. These lands are not significant natural heritage features. There's no natural features on them, so they shouldn't be designated for natural heritage purposes. But we believe there's a ways to address it, and we're willing to work with staff and your consultants to address that before OPA 62 comes back for your approval. Again, as Mr. Ziemba said, we're totally in support of OPA 62. We're welcome, and thank you for all the hard work that your staff and consultants have done. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lowe's. Are there any other members of the public wishing to speak?
There are, Mr. Mayor.
Oh, okay. I guess bring them forward. I can't see the full screen, so if there are members of the public, just bring. If you could just announce their name, and then I'll invite them on.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. James and Zoe Gunn.
Okay, if James and Zoe Gunn can come forward, there's their hand. I see them. Maybe IT can just start filling the screen, and then I can start to see them. The hands go up. I'm going to ask Mr. James and Zoe Gunn to unmute the microphone and make the presentation.
Can you hear us?
Yes, we can. Go ahead. Great,
thank you. So we are residents of West Lincoln. We reside at 3093 30 Road, which is located at the southeast corner of 30 and Yonge. We've been aware of the project from the very beginning. I remember our first public meeting, which was actually held in person at the new arena, and we've been following it as closely as we can. We did not join the landowner group for financial reasons, but we're under the impression that that would not change how our land was viewed through this process. So we have been included as part of the urban boundary expansion area all along until the most recent preferred concept, at which point we are no longer included. And so I've gone through trying to figure out what the reason for this could be. Our property, is located on the main road coming in and out of town when you're going to the highway. We don't have any areas of environmental sensitivity or potential corridors, fish habitats, floodplains, woodlands, shorelines, natural heritage corridors, so on and so forth. But we still are not included. The only line that I can find that explains this is indicated in the report that was presented. And it mentions that the area north of the Hydro 1 corridor, west of the Employment Park, and south of Yonge Street was not included in the proposed expansion area, mainly due to its proximity to existing livestock operations. So going through all the information we can find on the Smithville Urban Plan website, it's very difficult to get information about what is considered to be a livestock operation. The most recent presentation brought a fair bit of light to that. But it still doesn't make a whole lot of sense to us. We see some barns that have got MDS setbacks on them that are close to our property. One of them is ours, which is a small barn that holds 2 horses. That's number 22. Number 25 is empty. And then I see all these other setbacks that are within the preferred concept plan. So I'm not understanding why some are included and some are not. And I'd like to try to get some clarification on that and indicate that we'd really like to be reconsidered to be part of that. Do you want to expand?
Yes. All right, James Gunn. I just wanted to say a couple things to that. I noticed is when they were going over the commercial area, there was commercial area proposed for the east, the south, and the west ends of Smithville, but nothing in the north. So I don't understand why we're looking at every section of Smithville for that, except for one sector. Also, when these meetings were first held, one of the big concerns was traffic, and the people of Smithville said they did not want traffic going through town. As they mentioned, I think it was Eric or Carl today, said one of the big things is people are going to be traveling to the north to get onto the highway. So I don't understand why you wouldn't develop on the north, which was originally discussed, to get people closer to the highway instead of having 35,000, 38,000 people driving through town every day, congesting already busy roads. They've made the same mistake in other small towns like Waterdown. And the other thing that was first mentioned when they proposed this several years ago was that the land that they included would not be enough for what they actually needed. And especially now that Hamilton is not going ahead with their urban development, they've said there's going to be a greater need on other communities in the area. And I'm just not sure why we're getting rid of land when from day one they said that the land that was included would not be enough to accomplish what the goal was. So just wondering some of those questions. It's
okay. Like thank you very much. Yeah, I'm going to ask Mr. Weaver to where he can, and if not, we will get back to you with information if we can't meet your questions. Go ahead, Mr. Weaver.
Certainly, through you, Mayor Bilsma, to the residents, and thank you for those questions. I think some of the questions you've asked may be of interest to others in and around the study area as well, and so I think they are important. I wanted to highlight a couple of things in response to the question about why the land is not included north of the hydro corridor. save and except the part that we've identified along Industrial Park Road for employment uses. So it is a policy requirement in the provincial growth plan that the land need has to be justified. So in other words, the amount of land that the township can add to its urban area has to be based on the 2051 growth forecast and has to be aligned with the region's land needs assessment. So that the region of Niagara has completed a land needs assessment based on the 2051 growth forecast set out in the growth plan and has determined how much land all municipalities in the region have to accommodate and for the region as a whole. And for the portion that the township has to accommodate, there isn't enough growth allocated and isn't enough justification to warrant adding the full study area to the urban boundary. So that was one of the constraints on how much land we could add. The other, I think you've already noted, which is related to MDS. There is a barn, I think, slightly to the west of you and on the north side of Yonge Street. It's number 20 on our MDS mapping. It was identified as a concern in terms of the extent of its arc that extends into that north part. The MDS document that the province has developed does require that regardless of whether these barns are used for livestock or not, the arc has to be based on the capacity of the barn. And unless the barn is derelict and could not be used without significant reinvestment or building permits, we do have to factor in the capacity of existing barns. And to the west, there are some kind of a cluster of additional livestock barns that affected some of the consideration of that area for urban use. And then I guess the third point I would just make on that is there was some consideration in earlier concepts about extending the community area, extending the residential area past the hydro corridor. One of the reasons we contained it south of the hydro corridor is that was viewed as a kind of a natural, wide, open space land use separator. And what that really means is that it's a kind of a natural divide between different types of land uses, whether they be employment or residential or agricultural. It kind of seemed like a very logical physical feature in the north part of the study area to frame the build out limit of Smithville. Now, that's not to say that the land that you own and other land in that north area couldn't be added to the urban boundary in the future. That's still possible. These types of processes are expected to occur every few years and looking out further into the future in terms of the growth horizon. So that may be an area that's reviewed further again in the future to consider growth opportunities. But for the time being, we didn't have enough land justification and there were some constraints related to MDS as well as the consideration of the hydro corridor in developing the plan. I think there were maybe a couple of other parts to that question and one of them related to transportation. And maybe for that, I'll turn it to Ed to talk about that. I don't know, Ed, if you have any thoughts on that aspect.
Thank you, Steve. Yeah, I'll just add to the comment that, you did highlight that we anticipate growth in demand to the north. I would also note that the growth in demand is actually greater to the west. And so the three existing north-south corridors, which are Industrial Park Road, Station Street, and South Queens Road 5, along with the addition of the bypass, are deemed to provide sufficient capacity for north-south demand in the future, and that actually it's the west where the new links are most valuable and most needed.
Okay, thank you for that. The Guns, James and Zoe Gunn, are we've answered your questions. Are you satisfied for the time being?
I think we're still confused as to why some MDS setbacks matter and others don't. There are large livestock operations within the south end of Smithville that don't seem to have any difficulty having exceptions made for them. So it doesn't seem to make a whole lot of sense why that is a rule in the south end, but not in the north end. So hopefully we can understand that. And I understand if the amount of land needs to match the growth allocated, there are lots of parts of parcels of land that are being included that have all sorts of environmental aspects that make them much more significant. And when we have a piece of property that doesn't have any of those areas of concern, it seems silly that they're not being swapped out.
Okay, thank you for your comments. I think we also received one of the letters that our director mentioned in the beginning was from yourself as well. Is that not correct?
Yes, it is. Thank you for receiving that.
So we've received that. I'm sure the comments will be very similar. At this time, we're receiving comments. I think the question, there was a certainly strong attempt to answer it. However, there are lines of communication, so they will be entered into the record. Your concerns will be entered as part of this public meeting. And if you have any other further questions, you can write another letter based on what you've heard here this evening, and that will also be included. Am I correct, Mr. Director?
Paged. I'm sorry, Mr. Mayor. Can you repeat the question?
It's just the Guns have entered in a letter. If they have, if they would like to clarify some of the concerns based on the response that Mr. Weaver was able to give them, they'd still be able to enter that subsequent to this public meeting, correct?
That is correct, Mr. Mayor. The Guns know how to get a hold of me. I'm happy to talk to them, or I'm happy to respond to further written inquiries. And I think we will make an effort to respond to everyone's written inquiry before a recommendation report comes forward.
Correct. Okay, great. That's excellent. Okay, then I'm going to move on, and then Madam IT, I think that there was a few people still left waiting to speak.
Yes, we do, Mr. Mayor. Linda Sivier.
Okay, Linda Sivier, you have the floor. Go ahead.
Thank you. I also had put in a request to show a few PowerPoint slides while I'm speaking. Is that possible to do?
I think so. I'm sure you'll have screen sharing abilities. There we go. Go ahead.
Okay. I don't see a screen share pop up for me.
Oh, okay.
I think I have to be given a screen share, I think.
Madam IT.
We did see your screen, Linda.
Did you?
Yes.
Sorry, I had maybe jumped the gun there, Mr. Mayor. I was sharing, thinking that maybe only I had the ability to do that, but
all right.
Be.
Thanks. Are you seeing my screen now?
No, we're not.
Okay.
Try one more time.
All right. I still do not see the option to screen share here.
Along the bottom?
I have a chat and a lower hand, and that's the only thing I have on my screen.
It may be as she's not seen as a panelist, Madam IT. I don't know.
Yeah, I think I have to be invited as a person to share, and I don't believe I have been. From my experience with Zoom, you have to have been given permission to share your screen. So, oh, all right. Any case.
There we go.
I guess I'm going to read it. That's unfortunate.
Go ahead. Yeah.
All right. So we are Linda and Rick Sivier here. We are on 6562 Town Line Road, Region Road 14. We've been here for a long time, and we thank you very much for giving us the opportunity to give this feedback. My talk is evolving as the evening has gone on here. We'll state up front that we are fully in support of the plans that we have seen that have been developed by our planning department and consultants for the OPA 62. We understand now that the specifics will be presented in OPA 63. We wanted to speak specifically about the natural heritage system, and we wanted to comment on some of the aspects of that, including that will be included, I think, in the preferred concept that Mr. Weaver has presented. Just up front, referencing the Provincial Planning Act, the diversity and connectivity of natural features in an area and long-term ecological function and biodiversity of natural heritage systems is recommended that it be maintained, restored, or where possible, improved. That's in the Planning Act. It goes further on to require the maintenance of these linkages to protect, improve, and restore the quality and quantity of water. And I think it's worth saying that the definition of a natural heritage system is defined as an area which is linked by natural corridors and which are necessary to maintain biological and geological diversity, natural functions, viable populations of indigenous species and ecosystems. And of course, in Ontario and across the country in recent years, there's growing understanding as well as supporting legislation that these are essential to plant and animal protection and biodiversity. And they act as carbon sinks to combat climate change, protect water quality and quantity, mitigate effects of flooding and drought. And they also provide for the well-being of the human population, our physical and mental health, and important economic benefits as well. Natural heritage systems for the growth plan reads that municipalities will incorporate natural heritage systems for a growth plan as an overlay in official plans and apply appropriate policies to maintain, restore, enhance diversity and the connectivity of the systems. It goes on to say that at least 30% of the total developable area will remain or be returned to natural self-sustaining vegetation. Here's where my slides would have helped. Oh, well. Let's be clear what this means. These natural heritage systems, these 30% the policy referred to, are not individually planted trees here and there in isolated spots where they may or may not grow. And these natural systems are not a few trees planted along a boulevard, although those are attractive. Restored ecosystems require space, a location where they will thrive, good management to get them started, and then time. I did have a map of the natural heritage systems of the entire township, and on it, you could easily identify the corridors that were linking important natural features, and also the blue lines on the maps, which are also on other maps that have been presented tonight, showing fish habitat. Habitat for fish, but yes, also all manner of aquatic species that rely on aquatic systems, those that feed off of them, and riparian buffers along stream banks, and there are many of them. These are the areas of vegetation that prevent pollutants and topsoil from flowing into streams. I noted with pleasure in the presentation of the water management maps, the enhancement of those streams and some of the swales that are presently degraded. I did have too a chart of water pollutants, a chart presented by the Niagara Peninsula Conservation Authority. Many of those pollutants greatly exceeded standards, and those were found in the 20 Mile Creek. We don't take our drinking water from the 20 Mile Creek directly, but when you think about where that goes, it goes into Lake Ontario. And our water supply is in Lake Ontario, obviously, so you get the connection with our human health. Multiply the pollutants in our creek by the number of creeks flowing to the Great Lakes that provide drinking water to millions, and it's easy to see the responsibility that every municipality shares. All starts with protecting our many small streams and water courses. The master plan that we have seen, the amendments, work to address that, as does the preferred concept, and we highly support that. Now here I had some photos taken by some people who were kindly provided photos that live up on Harvest Gate. And they showed the remnants of the forest behind Harvest Gate and some lovely photos. This area supports species, even if seasonally, some of them. There is a pond in that small area of trees, and it appears each spring, and it's home right now to a chorus of spring peepers, and it's a way station to returning ducks, also in the photo, and a muskrat. It is home to cardinals, woodpeckers, spring orioles, and numerous other bird species, and children playing in that area as well. So last June, you were presented at council, presentation by the students of the Smithville Christian High School. Tree planting on approximately 2 acres of township land will take place this spring north of Golden Acres Drive through Land Care Niagara and with the township's financial support. And that is through the efforts of the students and their staff there. Now is a good time to continue restoration and enhancement. Funds and expertise are available from a variety of sources to support municipalities. In addition to the land care tree planting about to take place, the World Wildlife Federation and TD's Friends of the Environment are just 2 of those organizations funding and supporting restorations, and they're active locally. There was a chart too of the reasons why the students of the high school wanted to or supported this initiative in having an urban forest within the town, and it was drought and flood mitigation, and it was climate enhancement and species protection, and so on. Can't show that chart, but let's just congratulate the students for their understanding of why urban forests are so important. We fully expect there will be people who will challenge the master community plan amendments for their own financial interests. Let us understand that we, the residents, have hired the expertise of our planning department and their consultants to act in the best interests of the whole community. They understand the legislative requirements. They consider the local situation. They conduct the necessary studies to develop a comprehensive plan. And they are looking at the long term, the rest of our lives and the lives of those who come here after us for generations, and we should be guided by their expertise. And finally, protection, enhancement, and restoration of natural heritage systems are not in conflict with urban expansion or our economic well-being. These are essential pieces of the entire picture of a healthy community. We applaud the planning that has taken place to incorporate these systems for the benefit of all, and urge council to accept proposed amendments to the master community plan as they are presented. Thank you.
Thank you, Linda. And for the most part, you were making comments. And if there's any questions that you'd like to highlight, you could do so at this time. I would like to make 2 requests. First of all, it is unfortunate that we couldn't get your screen sharing to work for this particular evening, but you are welcome to send your comments, your written comments. It sounded like you were reading from a script, and that's really good. Can you send those to the clerk at jshime@westlincoln.ca, as well as your slide deck, and they will be entered as part of the record. And we will have access to them as well as counselors and be able to see that. So if you could do that for us as a favor, enter those comments that way, it would be great.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I appreciate it. I will do that. Yes. Okay,
great. Would anybody like to comment on something maybe that was a bit of a touchstone in Ms. Sevier's comments? I see none. Okay. Go ahead, Mr. Farrell.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'll take the chance that my internet continues to cooperate right now. First of all, thank you very much for the comments that were provided. They touched on quite a few aspects of the environmental system management. A couple of things that they mentioned that I just rather caught my attention in particular, the importance and the significance of the linkages in the area. Very much agree. Fundamentally, one can have a lot of natural features on a landscape, but if they're not properly connected, and integrated with the water resource system, it's not sustainable and it will not survive. So that was something that our team really paid a particular attention to, and involved the integration and coordination of all the members of the team, all the members of the study disciplines. So thank you very much for bringing that to our attention and noting that. The other item I just wanted to touch on quickly was the comment about the water pollution. And it's a good comment and observation. As noted in the presentation, urbanization does impact the water quality, does result in loadings of certain contaminants to the system, and it's important that these be managed and mitigated appropriately. The current standards that exist within the province allow for an end-of-pipe facility, a wet pond or a wetland, designed to provide an enhanced standard of treatment, which is formally at this point in time the highest standard that's available in the province. That said, however, there's emerging guidance, there's draft guidelines from the province now requiring really implementing controls at source. And this is where the LID BMPs and the green infrastructure come in that I made reference to. So I just wanted to make you aware that the need to further enhance the stormwater quality is something that's being recognized in the industry and across the province. And it's something that's been incorporated into our management plan accordingly.
Thank you, Aaron. And great. Okay. So I appreciate that. Madam IT, is there any folks left indicating that they would wish to speak to this public meeting?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, Brian Lass.
Okay. Go ahead, Brian. Oh, there we go. Brian Lass.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor and Council. Thank you, Mr. Trouble and Mr. Weaver and team as well for the additional information you shared this evening in the presentation. It answered a few number of questions I had. In concept plans 1 and 2, the areas to the north were shown as being considered for employment and mixed use respectively. In the draft preferred plan, it has been scaled back. Will a breakdown of the criteria and scoring, similar to the slides around the setback, that led to the recommendation to include some land in the north study area as employment and leave others outside the proposed boundary expansion, be published?
That's a good question. Either Mr. Treble or Mr. Weaver.
I'll start, Mr. Mayor, by simply saying that the justification that is required to complete our study will be provided to the region. If our justification provided to the region is adequate, I see no reason to have to provide any further justification to the property owners. There are limitations in terms of the amount of land to bring in based on our growth targets, and bringing in any more land beyond what satisfies the growth targets would be taking agricultural land out of production inappropriately, and I can't support that. So it's a fine line. Some win, some lose, and that's kind of where we're at in my mind. But Mr. Weaver can certainly get a little more technical.
Yeah, thank you, Brian. And through you, Mr. Mayor, to Mr. Laws. There was some thought given to a scoring and a ranking, but ultimately what it ended up being was more of a process at the regional level with input from our study team, because the region ultimately does have the responsibility to define the land needs and then the geography of the settlement areas. So I know the region had their own kind of ranking and scoring system referred to as the Settlement Area Boundary Review, or SABRE analysis. There's extensive reports relating to the regional official plan, the draft regional OP, on the region's website as well, that I'd encourage you to look at. I don't think you'll find details necessarily there on why certain land was not included. But it certainly includes some justification of the boundaries and the size of them, because it all relates back to the land need requirements. There will be some further information coming as well, as I say, through OPA 63 and the master plan reports, the sub-watershed study reports, et cetera, that collectively establish some of the rationale for the shape of what you're seeing.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank
I
you.
had one follow-up.
Yeah,
I had one follow-up question, but it's more if the draft preferred plan does go through, and would a single-family dwelling be permitted in the future on that vacant property, north of the hydro, if it remains zoned as it is? Maybe that's a separate discussion, but more just curiosity.
I'm going to let Director of Planning go ahead, Mr. Treble.
Mr. Lass, I'd be happy to have that discussion with you sometime. I don't think it's a question that can be answered here tonight in this forum.
Thank you.
Okay. Is that all, Mr. Lass?
That is all, Mr. Mayor. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Madam IT, any further from the gallery?
Mr. Mayor, I'm seeing none.
Okay. Then I'm going to now go to members of the committee to ask some questions. Do any members of the council have any oral or written submissions on the proposed official plan amendment? Please note that members of the committee must make their comments now, as OLT may not consider comments made at any other council or committee meeting. Any member of council wishing to speak are required to unmute their microphone to talk, and once they are finished, they should mute their microphone. I'm going to go actually, I saw Councillor Ganan. I did get a little note from Councillor Riley that his battery is getting low. So I'm going to ask him first if he wants to enter some questions or comments at this time. That way, if his battery dies, he's got something on the record. And he's the phone number at the bottom corner there. Councillor Riley, do you have anything that you'd like to enter? We can't hear you. All right, I'm going to go to Councillor Ganan then, and I'll try to. He did mention that he had really nothing, so but I thought I'd give him first crack at it anyways. But Councillor Ganan, go ahead.
Okay, if Councillor Riley comes on, I'll be happy to stop. Anyway, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I want to thank the team for their wonderful presentation. First of all, I think that we've heard it several times. Each time it's refined and better explained, I think, in terms of giving us overall information for the work that's been done. I especially want to thank Mrs. Sevier, who did a wonderful job. But in addition to the presentation she made tonight, we received a couple of other really excellent presentations from residents that didn't want to speak tonight, but certainly provided excellent input into this, all in support of protecting our natural heritage systems. And so I think that although our planning staff and our team of consultants are all very much looking in the same area and thinking how important it is, I think it was really important tonight to hear from residents as well, so that we know that the people who are living in close proximity to all of those areas really do care about the future of West Lincoln. So just no questions, just a comment of thanks to those people. Thank you, Mr.
Great.
Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor. I'm going to go to the other councillors. Councillors Bradrick, Trombetta, anything that you'd like to enter? Okay, Councillor Jonker, go ahead, sir.
Yeah, I guess to you, Mr. Mayor, to Mr. Weaver, I was wondering if he could share his screen again, and then where the pictures were of the barns, the circles. The question I have is those 3 lots that were added above. It seems like they've just jogged 1 block over away from Yonge Street for whatever reason. But if my memory serves me correctly, on that one that's jumped over, yeah, you see the one that's jumped over, you have a barn right in the whole circle of that one. And when I go onto Google Map and look there at that block versus the one towards 30, I also see that there's a bigger on the bottom of that block versus the block towards a 30 road or County Road 14. So I'm wondering if that is something that you would consider too, going, well, why would we include that block and not the one with the few barns that have just a couple horses and then a hobby farm? And that one barn, it does look like a fairly substantial barn on that block. I don't know what it's used for, but so yeah, that rationale there to bump it out one block to me is a question mark. That I'm wondering if you can answer that.
Councillor Jonker, do you have can you see the little numbers there?
No, I can't.
Oh, okay. All right.
It's 20, I believe.
20. Okay.
If you move over
on
to
the corner
blue,
of the S bend.
No, keep going west. I think it's 29, barn 29. The other way, barn 29. Yes.
Oh, that one there. Yes.
Yeah. Right. That one's right in a lot. Whereas if you move, there's just a couple little hobby barns, and I don't know which barns are which or what they're used for, but it does when I went onto Google Map, I seen that that's a bigger barn there than what's on the block towards 14, original road 14. So that's kind of what I'm wondering. What was the rationale to bump it out one block west instead of keeping that line straight and including the block on 14? That's just
okay. All right. I think there's some clarity. I'm going to let Mr. Weaver take a stab at it. Why the 29 block and not the looks like about the 26, 26,
22,
25, or 25,
yeah,
22.
Yes, those two differences.
Yeah, there we go. Okay, go ahead, sir.
Sure, through you, Mayor Bilsma, to Councillor. It's a great question. Could we have pushed it out west instead of east? The issue with not including the land where the property where barn number 29 is that you wouldn't then be able to include any of that land east of Industrial Park Road, because the arc from barn 29 would overlap the boundary. And the only justification that we've been able to arrive at with the region for an overlapping arc with the urban boundary is if there's, say, some intervening land uses like existing residential or something in between that are already closer to the barn, or if the barn is completely brought into the urban boundary, in which case it's intended the area will transition to urban land uses in due course, or if there's natural heritage system in the in-between. In other words, the only overlapping part of the arc is going to be preserved as natural environment. And we didn't have any of those factors apply in this case. So by leaving barn 29 out of the boundary, it actually becomes more of a constraint than bringing it in. It does relate back to some of the questions about the area west, where barns 20 and 22 are identified. Like certainly bringing barn 22 in, like that could be considered, if not for barn 20. The problem with barn 20 is it's on the north side of Yonge Street, and the area north of Yonge Street isn't part of the study. So if we were to attempt to bring the urban boundary up to Yonge Street in that area, we would have a significant overlap with the arc from barn 20. And as I say, the region has a major concern in particular with that, because throughout the region, they're trying to apply a consistent methodology to all municipalities on where MDS is a constraint to the extent that you cannot include the urban boundary, and where there may be some exceptions related to intervening land uses, complete inclusion of the barn in the boundary, or natural heritage factors. So that's the basic rationale. And I guess the only other comment I would make is we were trying to stay contiguous with the existing easterly extent of the industrial area as much as possible. I know it does bump out a bit further east, but there is kind of that defined land use pattern east-west in the community between industrial and residential. Well, hopefully some of those comments are helpful, but
okay, thank you, Mr. Weaver. Councillor Jonker, you still have the floor.
Yeah, to me, it's still, I don't understand it. And I guess like you have a blue circle there that's taking up that whole lot versus just a wee little corner of 22 and 20 taking up that lot. And then when I looked at Google Map, in behind Country Raw, you have that lot of Country Raw, and then that's the old farm property line, and then you have a big bush. So right where his arrow is right now, well, he just removed it. Yeah, that's all bush there. So that's not going to be, to me, it just, like that whole farm isn't going to be able to be used unless you removed barn 29. So that's my rationale in what asking the question. It just seems like there's that whole lot is not really usable. Whereas the one with barn 22 in there, at least a third of that looks usable to me when I look at this map of the circled barns. That's right. But yeah, there is some heritage in there too, but.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think Mr. Treble might be able to shed some light on this.
Mr. Mayor, actually, I'm going to go a slightly different way than shedding light on it. I'm going to suggest that getting into detailed technical discussions tonight is just beyond the ability to accomplish this. And certainly, I think there are limitations to the Zoom forum, and this might be one of them. I'd be more than happy to have a face-to-face discussion with Mr. Jonker in some way, shape, or form that might be able to assist a little bit further in helping his understanding, as I'm struggling a little bit to know exactly what he's referring to. If it's the barn that I think, the one that's got the cursor on it right now, that's inside an employment area, whereas I think the other lands he's talking about are being considered for residential. So the setback requirements and the calculations are totally different and done in a totally different way. So, Mr. Mayor, rather than dwelling on this further, I'd like to invite Mr. Jonker to reach out to me, and we'll set up an opportunity to discuss this further.
Okay.
I do understand, but okay, now I understand. But then the circle could have been made smaller, I guess, to show the different sizes of a setback that blue circle would have been. But
okay,
so I understand it now. Thanks, Mr. Treble and Mr. Mayor.
Okay, great. Excellent. Any other members of council wishing to, Councillor Bradrick?
Thank you, Mayor. Just a couple of questions for some clarification. So first to Edward, who made the presentation about transportation. And a couple of times you mentioned the north bypass being linked to an escarpment crossing. So I just wanted to confirm that you're talking about a north-south escarpment crossing towards the QEW. Is that correct?
Thank you, Councillor. Yeah, in response to Mr. Mayor, the new escarpment crossing is a regional program that is currently looking at connections between the township of West Lincoln and the QEW, so it would be a north-south alignment.
Okay, thank you. I just didn't want to assume. And the second question for you, Edward, as well, is about Town Line Road. There showed in one of the screens that you had during your presentation some significant transportation increases during the time. Yep, that's the screen. To Town Line Road. And I may have missed during your presentation what type of upgrades. I think you had said something about a turning lane on Town Line Road. Is this going to be like an arterial road or a collector road? What kind of upgrade and hopeful mitigation to that increase in traffic flow for that area?
Yes, that's correct. So what we found in our analysis was that the majority of the delays being caused along this road are a result of vehicles trying to make turning maneuvers across a live traffic lane, so mostly left turns. So it was felt that by adding a third turning lane in the middle, it would alleviate some of those delays and provide the vehicles wishing to travel straight through an intersection or make a right turn, the ability to avoid that queued traffic. So our recommendation is that this road will be widened to effectively 3 lanes of traffic, with the middle lane being a turning lane, staggered for left turns as appropriate, and the queue lengths would vary for each left turn depending on the demand for left turns there.
Okay, thank you very much. That answers the question about transportation. And my last question is for information purposes as well, and it's for Aaron, and I apologize, I don't remember your last name. I was interested on the discussion around the karst, is that how you pronounce it, features. And if I remember correctly from one of the original screens, there was 3 areas that were developed. So is there a possibility that there could be more of these features that are present within this increased urban boundary that we are not currently aware of? And if so, what would be the impact of the development of those areas? So I apologize through you, Mr. Mayor, to Aaron.
It's Aaron Farrell. Go ahead, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Madam Councillor. So the short answer is it's always possible that there are additional karst features on the landscape that have not been captured through this work. The expectation that we have, though, because the work has been done not only by our team, but also has been informed by information from the landowner consultants, is that whatever karst features would remain on the landscape that have not been captured would really be not be significant enough to attract that 50-meter setback. Through the work, what we've captured, it's really call them the big ticket items, the ones that would require some sort of protection at the scale of planning. So if there are any other features on the landscape that may be encountered, they could be managed without requiring that 50-meter protective buffer.
Okay, thank you. I know that this has happened in other communities in the past where these features have been discovered and there has to be a redirection of development that they had assumed would take place and wasn't no longer been able to do so. So I was just curious about how much knowledge we have of that area and what possibilities there could be for other types of those features. So thank you. That concludes my questions.
Thank you, Councillor Broderick. I did manage to connect with Councillor Riley. He said he had no comments or questions. So just so that for the record, we have been he has communicated to me that he tried to unmute and say that into the meeting. And any others? I have, if there aren't, I just have a couple of quick questions. The first one is there was a Mr. Lowe at the beginning who kind of addressed it, so I'll just rehash it from my perspective or as a council member, that the MDS setback that is in conflict with some potential residential, the comment was made that we could just convert that into natural heritage, and I would echo the concern that was raised by Mr. Lowe from the landowners group that I would prefer, I don't exactly know how you resolve that specifically, but if there's a way to kind of put it in a holding pattern, I know everything needs to be defined, but that perhaps by the time we build out, because I understand that it's probably close to the end of phase 4 when that could potentially be developed or have to be developed, that perhaps the neighborhood changes and the barns are obsolete or whatever. Rather than to go through a process of an amendment that would bring that back into some kind of usable space, that it goes into some kind of holding pattern. I don't know if that's an actual possibility. I don't really need an answer on that, but if that can be solved in that way, that's what my preference would be. And the second question has to, I'll be asking this of our own director, and it has to do with Spring Creek Road. Spring Creek Road forms a bit of a boundary between the expansion and our current urban boundary limit. And I've raised the question before, and I think it was with respect to the RVL development that is actually now just north of Spring Creek Road. Spring Creek Road, is that defined as part of our current or our secondary plan that we did on the northwest quadrant?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, the Spring Creek Road is effectively the boundary of the existing urban area. So Spring Creek Road is half in the urban boundary and half not in the urban boundary and in its current form effectively.
So
and it's
yeah,
a local
so
road.
when I I raised this issue before, like whether we needed to upsize it. I know it was currently on the edge, so you don't typically have a big road running along the edge, but so then who or when does it become our responsibility as part of a secondary plan? Is it too late for our own current, or is that part of the urban boundary when we get the OP 62 and 63 complete, and then we go to secondary plans as part of that process? I'd hate to see us build out a kind of a minor local road and then have an urban boundary expansion, and in 2 or 3 years we're kicking ourselves because we didn't make it big enough.
So the one thing that is advantageous with this process that West Lincoln has not had the benefit of enjoying in the past are what we call master plans. So, Mr. Mayor, we are, and I think at the region you're used to these, there are plans that talk about the timing of infrastructure requirements and when they should be brought online. So there's, at the end of this process, we're going to have an infrastructure master plan for sewer, for water, for stormwater, and for transportation. That will help help answer your questions. It's maybe a little late for Spring Creek, but it'll certainly help with the future ones. The one thing about Spring Creek that we've struggled with, and Mr. Stubing has been very assisting in helping clarify for us. Initially, we weren't sure if Spring Creek would be the linkage off of Highway 20 at the roundabout, but it simply isn't going to work. We're going to need a better location for a through link. So I think at best, Spring Creek is likely going to stay some sort of a local road, which takes the pressures off, I think, a little bit from what we were initially concerned about. That's kind of where I understand it. I might not have explained it anywhere nearly as well as Mr. Stubing could, but that's kind of my understanding. So the key, though, is the master plans will help us because that'll tell us what needs to go into the development charges background study to be collecting for so that we can make sure it's paid for in the future and all of that kind of stuff. So there's massive benefits coming out of all of this work that will help us.
So as I understand, it's the grade separation over the tracks that may divide Spring Creek Road from Grimsby Road 6, and they'll ne'er the twain shall meet.
Yeah, that's the challenge. The skies. Try that again. The size and scale of the overpass or underpass simply makes connection with with Spring Creek Road next to impossible.
Yeah. Okay. And all I'm really trying to address in terms of a concern is that we don't put good money after a road. You know, it's a road that's completely, for the most part, doesn't even exist for much of the north edge of the northwest quadrant, and I want to make sure that we address it, knowing full well that the UBE is going to take place, and I was just trying to assess responsibilities. Is it part of ours now, or is it part of the transportation plan as part of OPEA 63?
Yeah, you're asking the very same kind of questions your public works staff are making sure that Mr. Stubing addresses as part of his research.
Well, then I really appreciate them. They're on the right page. Okay, I'm going to go back to
Mr. Mayor. May I make just one point? Just if I can, I see in the comments or in the chat, I guess you call it, that there's a question from James and Zoe Gunn, and it's practice not to respond to or make note of questions there.
Correct.
And again, it's a technical question, so I'd encourage Zoe to reach out to me or James to reach out to me, and I can help.
And that was, as I was going to conclude this, I was going to highlight that and just say that they always have the opportunity to reach out to you directly subsequent to this, and that will all be entered into the comment section as the package for this public meeting. Councillor Jonker, I see you have another question.
Yeah, the internet was goofing up there for me when I was. I just had one other quick question through you, Mr. Mayor, to his name is escaping my mind right now, but I'll call him Mr. Transportation, if that's okay. When we're looking at the options of the bypass, I just want this on the record that residents understand, and kind of I do too, that when we're looking at options, when we talk about going over or under the track, that's a pretty big expense. So is expenses part of looking at option A, B, or C, and which one would be better? Does cost kind of come out in that options as well? So when you look at, doing the South Loop, we don't have the 2 train crossings, but we don't have the link to the hopefully link to the QEW. But yeah, so there's cost analysis done in these transportation studies as well, I'm sure. But I just want to know that for a fact. But
go ahead, Mr.
Thank you.
Stephen.
Thank you, Councillor. Through you, Mr. Mayor. Yes, indeed, we do factor cost in. It's not the only component. I think it was mentioned this evening that unfortunately CP Rail will not allow any new at-grade crossings. So if we are going to create any new crossings, they do have to be grade separated, either over or under. Generally, in an area like this, they would most likely be over. There is unlikely to be a requirement to maintain the spacing for electrification of that particular corridor, which means the bridge doesn't need quite as high a clearance, making it cheaper than going under. The other thing to keep in mind is the southern bypass alignment that we were looking at really didn't offer the same benefits from a traffic impact within the middle of town as the northern ones did. And that was really probably the single biggest driving factor in our recommendation. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. Okay. Seeing no more councillors indicating that they wish to speak, I'm going to advise that a technical report is being considered by council this evening, and that a recommendation report will be forthcoming to a future committee and or council meeting. Please be advised that once committee and or council has made a decision with respect to the official plan amendment, and if they approved by council, a notice of their passing will be circulated with an appeal period. If you wish to be notified of the council's decision, please ensure that you email the township clerk, Joanne Shimei, at jshimei@westlincoln.ca. Anyone who is interested in observing council and or committee discussions about the particular bylaw should not solely rely on mailed notices and thus miss the opportunity to attend applicable meetings. It is suggested that you watch the township's website for posting of agendas and review items that will be discussed at council and or committee meetings. The agendas for meetings are posted on the township website after 4 p.m. on the Friday prior to the meeting. Additionally, meeting schedules are also noted on the township's website for the public to view. If you wish to receive notices by email, it is suggested that you contact the township clerk to advise of your request and include your email address along with your mailing address and your phone number. Seeing nothing further, this public meeting with respect to the proposed official plan amendment is concluded at the hour of 8:47. Thank you very much, and council will be going into the remainder of our council meeting. Any guests are welcome to attend and stay, but we will be shifting gears slightly. So I'm just wet my whistle for a second. Just give me 30 seconds. I'm going to back up for a little bit. I was a little bit remiss. I'm going to read the land acknowledgement statement. Then I'm going to ask if there's are any pecuniary conflict of interest. So at this time, I'm going to say and state that appropriately that the township of West Lincoln, being part of the Niagara region, is situated on treaty land. This land is steeped in the rich history of the First Nations, such as the Hattaway-Ronk, the Haudenosaunee, and the Anishinaabe, including the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. There are many First Nations, Métis, and Inuit people from across Turtle Island that live and work in Niagara today. The township of West Lincoln, as part of the regional municipality of Niagara, stands with all Indigenous people, past and present, in promoting the wise stewardship of the lands on which we live. I would like to state that Councillor Rayner has not attended this meeting and has given regrets, and Councillor Riley is attending by telephone. I would also ask at this time, are there any councillors, are there any disclosures of pecuniary and or conflict of interest? I see and hear none, Madam Clerk.
No, Mr. Mayor, none for me if you can hear me.
Yep, I can hear you this time. Thank you.
And I have about 2% left, so I'm hoping we can get through this.
Good for you. Oh, shoot. I just, so then we have a resolution before us. Councillor Bradrick, if my memory serves, I just for some reason lost my my e-scribe, but I think Councillor Bradrick, you had the resolution that needs to be read at this time.
Yes, sir, I do. I'm just not sure if the Director of Planning and Building has a technical report to present first, or should I read the resolution first?
I think he'll present it will be in the resolution, will it not?
I will go ahead and read that, sir.
Okay, thank you.
Moved by myself, Councillor Shelley Bradrick, that report PD 48-2022 regarding technical report proposed Smithville urban boundary for growth to 2051 and official plan amendment number 62 dated April 27th, 2022 be received, and that a recommendation report be presented at a future Planning, Building, Environmental Committee meeting following the receipt of any additional public or agency comments and the adoption of the new regional official plan by Regional Council.
I'll second it, Mr. Mayor.
Great. Okay, thank you. Seconded by Councillor Trombetta. Any comments or questions? This is, of course, the technical report being sent to staff to come back with a recommendation report. Any comments or questions? I see none. So then I'm going to call the question. All those in favor?
Support.
Thank you, Councillor Riley. That's carried. And being that there's no further business, I declare this meeting adjourned at the hour of 9:52. Thank you very much. 8:52. Yeah. Thank you very much. Yeah, you can see where my brain is turned into mush. 2 meetings in 1 week. My water is now changed to coffee. So 8:52. Everyone have a